So next up, let's talk about the private modifier. So we can put private in front of any property or in front of any method, which we haven't done yet, but if I had some other methods, I can make them private. And that will tell TypeScript this property or this method is only accessible or usable inside the class, and I shouldn't be able to access it outside the class. So if for some reason I wanted to make score private, I could do that. And if I try and access score now, elton.score, I'm outside the class, TypeScript will yell at me and say score is private and only accessible within that class. But this is all a TypeScript construct. My underlying code, once again, won't have private, it won't have public. So you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, doesn't JavaScript actually support its own notation, its own syntax for private properties and methods? Yes, we saw it in the previous section. You use the hash symbol. This is different though. This is actually code that JavaScript recognizes and TypeScript will leave alone, and it will actually make it into JavaScript. So this is another way of saying this is a private property. There's some key differences though. One is I've actually changed the name of the property. This is the property. It's not just score, right? Here I'm saying this is a private thing called score. I happen to think this is maybe clunkier, but far clearer. Versus this, it's just kind of confusing, but it works. And this is true, real JavaScript code. But TypeScript will complain about a couple things. First of all, before it will even recognize any of this stuff, it's going to say private identifiers are only available when targeting ES 2015 and higher. Right now, I'm on the default for me, which is ES5. So if I go to ES 2015 and save, I'll come back here. Sometimes it takes a moment. Did it fix itself? There we go. Okay. And now if I, do anything with score, I try and change it, I try and just read it, I get a complaint, and it says it's not accessible because it has a private identifier. So there's some conversations in the TypeScript community about whether that private modifier is necessary or whether even the private modifier should actually result in this behind the scenes. It's a long conversation and it probably won't happen. But for now, you basically have a choice. Do you make your code or do you create private properties using the JavaScript syntax with the hash symbol, or to use a private modifier from TypeScript? You can't do both in TypeScript because it's going to complain and say an accessibility modifier cannot be used with a private identifier. So this is the private identifier. You use one or the other. Personally, I'm getting around to using this more, but you'll see private way, way more often. You'll see it all over the docs and other code bases because this has been the TypeScript option and the only option for a while. Anyway, so I like to use public and private together. We're going to learn one more called protected later on. I think it's a little clunkier to have public and then you just have to know what that hash symbol means. With that said, this is real JavaScript, and this provides you protection not just before you compile, but actually once the code is running. This gives me an error if I try and set that equal to something, because it's JavaScript. We saw that in the previous section. Whereas if I use the private modifier, this is only going to yell at me or complain when I'm trying to do something before the code is compiled, right? Only beforehand when TypeScript is scanning over. Then it will complain to me, but I could still do something at runtime. So I don't know, I'm a little conflicted. I think we'll see a lot more of this going forward, but I think private is a cleaner solution, or at least a more readable solution, and it's more commonly used right now. Either way, they accomplish the same concept. It's just one is going to be enforced in TypeScript before compilation, and then the other option, the one that's built into JavaScript with the hash symbols, will work at runtime. So this video is mostly about the private keyword though, this modifier. Let's just do an example of making a private method as well. I can add a method in here called, I don't know, what would a private method be? Maybe something like, just how about secret method? And it won't accept anything, and it just console.logs secret method. Okay, very stupid. Right now, I'll annotate this just to be consistent. Anyone can call this in the class, outside the class, right? I can do secret method, no problem. And we see that printed out when I run my JavaScript, but that's beyond the point. We're talking about TypeScript before compilation. Now, if I annotate this with the private keyword, now TypeScript will yell at me down here and say, whoa, 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 that property is private and only accessible within the class. And then I run my code and, oh, it still runs and still works because it made it into JavaScript, right? TypeScript is yelling at me, but it still compiled the code, and JavaScript doesn't care about this private keyword because it actually goes away. So we just end up with this, and this is totally valid JavaScript. With that said, if I call this from within the class somewhere, like when you instantiate, I'll just do this.secret method. This works just fine. We have a private method that we're calling inside the class. Okay, so that's the private modifier. You don't have to use it. You don't have to use the public modifier, but just remember, public is the default. You can use that to be explicit, to make it very clear what your intention is with a property or a method. And then when we mark something as private, it's only on the TypeScript side of things, and it tells TypeScript that this method or property should only be accessible or usable in the class it's defined in, and not outside.